Do you want to learn exactly how to be a game master, how to set things up and to run your encounters, and deal with any issues that may arise at the table? Well, stick here with us because today we're going to sit down behind the screen and talk you through a typical gaming session, step by step.
Welcome, Game Masters, to SRD, where our second-rate production will make you a first-rate GM. If you like our videos, please consider subscribing down below.
So in today's video, we're going to do something a little bit different. Before we've just kind of sat down in front of the green screen and we've talked about various tips and tricks about the trades. But today we're actually going to bring you behind the screen and we're really going to go over what a game master does. You look all over the internet a lot of times and you find people just looking for, well, how do you actually do this? And so we're gonna give it a shot. We're gonna give it an attempt and try to explain our best way of what a general session just kind of looks like. So today we will be using Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, just because it is something that I think the majority of the public at this point is kind of familiar with. This has been the renaissance of our life right now. I mean, you have to give it to Wizards of the Coast. They've really brought us from the basements of our parents' basements, and now we're kind of in the limelight. So we're gonna use this for today. It's really important to remember that what we're talking about today is going to be super basic and super simple and bare bones just to get the concepts across. So the first thing that you really want to do when you're sitting down for your session, we've talked about the 6 steps of GMing. So at this point we've already written our game, we've already prepared our game, we've already sold it to our players, those kinds of things, but now it's time to sit down and actually run the game. So one of the first things that you need to do before you get here is make sure that you got your notes ready, right? So today's session is going to be all about our NPC Gerald. And what Gerald is going to be doing is he's hiring our players today to escort him through the Fell Wood. And that is what our setup essentially is going to be. That's going to be the goal of this particular session. So one of the first things you want to do when you begin a game is you either want to, one, recap your last episode or show or wherever you want to call it. For a long time, our friend Jason, he's done this like last time on Dungeons & Dragons, like a very Dragon Ball Z kind of thing. But make sure that you kind of recap either what happened last time or that you have a really good introduction for your campaign that you're getting ready to start or your one-shot that you're getting ready to start. People have lives, and there could be, sometimes there's weeks in between your games, sometimes months, unfortunately. We don't recommend that you go that long, anything more than, I think, about 4 weeks, and you might as well cash it in and just go ahead and start a new session because
everybody's forgotten.
Yeah,
and
they've forgotten.
Yep.
The GM's lost interest in it. The players have probably lost interest in it, and it's probably just best to let her go and try again. So,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there is nothing wrong with that. Depending on your age, there's family involved. Kids, wives, spouses, work. Some of us have military. Like there's just stuff that just gets in the way at times, and family always comes first. Yeah, so when you're doing your recap, you kind of want to touch on kind of the highlights of what happened last time. Actually, what I like to do is I like to go around the table and ask the players what they remember from the last session, and then as they go around filling in the different blanks, I'll listen to what's going on, compare it with my notes, and if it's not correct or if there is something they forgot, just go ahead and fill in those blanks. All right, so what happened last time?
Well, I was at the Days Inn Tavern. I do remember that, and I was drinking heavily, very heavily, as I tend to do. Sure. But somebody slipped me a note. I didn't see who it was. It was kind of like it just appeared on the table right underneath my arm as I was drinking my grog. But it said to find Jerome for some work. Something about he was a traveling merchant and he needed some help.
Right. So that's right. You guys were at the tavern. You're having some good times there, meeting with a few people. And actually that note said Gerald.
Gerald.
So you're going to be looking for Gerald at the stables. Okay.
Gerald at the stables.
That's right. So once you've gone through your recap, the next thing that you really want to do is kind of set the beginning scene of wherever that you're going to be at. So we talked about last time they were at the tavern. They haven't left the tavern yet, so we're going to set that scene up there, that they're at the tavern. You want to think about your adjectives and your adjectives, and kind of describing the place, trying to bring it alive as much as you possibly can. You don't have to be the greatest wordsmith to do this, just as long as you're getting across the basic idea of where they're at and they understand where they're at, because they'll let you know. They will say, especially if a fight happens in the tavern, they'll be like, well,
I wasn't over there. I was not there.
Yeah, I was not there. I was not by the tavern bar. I was actually over in the corner. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Just give them a good description. So the Days Inn Tavern is actually it's a pretty decent size. So if you're looking at it, you can see on the west wall, there's this huge, almost picturesque window, and the sun just kind of peeks in almost at the end of the day, and you can see it kind of rising across the frames. It's almost too bright, honestly, for a tavern, you know, for a bunch of people that are in there trying to drink. It's a little bright, but you can see about 7 or 8 different round tables with some chairs, and it's scattered across the room, with one pub across the wall from the window. You can see a door that's next to that bar there, and it looks like it may go back to a galley or a kitchen of some sort. It's pretty noisy in here. There's a lot of conversation, and you can hear a kind of a minstrel over in the corner. You can hear some strumming of an instrument, but you really can't see where it's coming from. So part of what I have here behind my screen, and you may or may not be able to see everything, is that I have a small laptop that I use with me, and I have a couple programs that I keep on there. They're all internet-based, so they're easy to find. The first one is Cobalt Fight Club. If you're using 5th edition, it's phenomenal for how deadly is an encounter, trying to kind of testing that CR a little bit. So we'll try to show you on the screen, but essentially you can put in the number of players and the level and whatever monsters you want to put in there, and it'll tell you if it's an easy, medium, hard, or deadly encounter. Personally, I try to run anywhere between 3 to 5 combat encounters in a session, probably around 3. It just really depends on what's going on with the story at the time. So your session essentially is just a buildup of encounters. And encounters aren't always combat. Matter of fact, the majority of them aren't combat. So you're gonna have your social interactions, exploration and skill checks, those kinds of things, and combat. And so those are your different types. You can also have puzzles in there, traps, all those different things are gonna mix together to make your session flow. So for example, I'm looking at this session, we're beginning with some social interaction. We're looking for Gerald. We're trying to find him. He's at the stables, right? Because that's what we learned from the last session. So the players are going to either gather information as to where those stables are, or they're just going to go there because they already know where they're at. And they're going to be looking for Gerald there. So we're going to move there right now. So you guys are moving over there to the stables, right? As you guys are moving through town, it's kind of a quiet morning. There's a few apple carts that are out, some flowers and those kinds of things that are being sold. There's not a whole lot of movement on the streets, and you can actually see the stables on the south side of town.
Okay, so we're just going to make our way to the stables, but I want to kind of carefully peek around and make sure that nobody's following me. I'm still a little wary of where this note came from.
Sure, absolutely. As you guys are making your way through, just go ahead and make a perception check, just kind of see if anyone is following you.
Okay. 12.
12, okay. So most games will have some way of testing the player's ability to do something in the world. In Dungeons & Dragons, for example, you're going to do skill checks. And actually most games, they're called skill checks. It just depends on the whatever system that you're using, what dice they'll roll. Sometimes they'll roll a d20, sometimes they'll roll several d6s or a d100. But in this case, the player is going to roll a d20, add whatever the relevant number is. In this game, it is going to be on top of their perception. Add them together and give it to the game master. The game master is going to set me the DC for that, the difficulty challenge. And there are several different ways that you can do this. I believe in the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, it gives you a very strict, like 10 is easy, 15 is kind of hard, 20 is impossible, those kinds of things. I like to keep things pretty simple. If it is, in this example, they're looking to see if somebody's following them. I know that nobody is following them at this point in time. So I'm going to let the player roll a dice, and as long as it's not a 1 or something extremely low, I'm just going to go say something along the lines of, no, you're looking around and you're being extra careful, but you don't seem to see anybody following you at all. You're absolutely sure that you're not being followed. Okay. So that you've given them value to their roll, and telling them that their skill was good, their roll was good, and their ability was good. Simply saying, yes, somebody's following you, or no, somebody's not. Or just shutting the player down when they ask for that and saying, no, because there's nobody following you. They don't know that information. They're looking for it. So let the role play out. Let the game play out, the system play out. Whether you know the rule, whether you know the answer or not already. Yeah, so you move on down the street. Again, nobody's following you, and you make your way to the stables. What do you want to do there?
I want to talk to Gerald.
Okay, yeah. You'll actually find him. He seems to be in the back. You see him brushing a horse. He's got a big, thick brush. It actually looks like a kind of expensive-looking brush. It's got maybe some copper inlays on it. It's really fine looking, yeah.
For a stable boy, it's an awful nice brush. That's what I say to him.
That's what you say to him?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm not the stable boy, son. I am, in fact, a fine merchant of wares. And if you think back, you'll realize that, you had a discussion the evening before the last session. You may have forgot it. And sometimes you need to remind your players, they may forget things in between weeks. They'd had a discussion already about who Gerald was. They kind of asked around after that note was slipped to them. And that's okay. People are going to forget details. As long as you keep reinforcing them over time, they'll go with them. So at this point, what you want them to do is you're going to have a social interaction is what we call this. Dungeons & Dragons specifically is built on the three pillars of social interaction, exploration, and combat. This is one of them. So this role play that's going to happen between Kaufman and myself is an encounter. It may or may not involve dice rolls. I may ask him for bluff checks or deception or those kinds of things, or it may just end up with a straightforward conversation. So yes, my boy, what are you doing here?
Well, I was drinking last night at the inn, and somebody slipped me a note saying that you may need some help.
Ah, yes, I do. I'm actually looking for some fine, strapping young gentlemen just like yourself. I've been having some trouble on the road, and I was hoping that you could help me out there. I'm looking for some strapping young men to guard my caravan as we cross the way.
Cross what way?
Ah, the fell wood. It is, there tends to be some brigands that may show up from time to time.
I'm always down for a beat down on some brigands.
Amen. Very easy. I'll pay you 5 gold per day.
5 gold per day. Is that per person, or is that total?
I see. Yes, we'll go with 5 gold per person per day.
Okay. I'm going to consult with the other people.
Sure. So what we have there is a very simple social interaction. It didn't require dice rolls. It didn't require any rules. And that kind of thing is system agnostic. It's just a conversation between a non-player character who had a goal, who needed to get from point A to point B, and the PCs themselves, the player characters. He's just looking to hire somebody to get him from the city to Fellwood. Simple as that. And the players have obliged that, and they've taken that job. There was a little bit of negotiation there, but that's okay. So the next type of encounter that we want to talk about is something that I really like a lot. It's the traps and the puzzles portion of games. I think a lot of GMs tend to leave this out a bit of their games, or they use very stiff puzzles that are too difficult for their players to get through. So puzzles and traps can be a fantastic way of getting your players to use their minds more than just their sheets, their character sheets in front of them and the dice that they can roll. Now those things can help them in certain puzzles or things like that, traps. But the more engaging that the trap or puzzle is, the more that it's going to bring them in. So one that I like to use a lot is something that's called a compound puzzle. So for example, in my last game that I'd ran, the entire dungeon was built as a giant slider puzzle. So each room was a 10 by 10 square room, and it worked just like a slider puzzle that you would use for kids. So it was a picture that you'd slide up a piece, and the next piece would slide in, and so on and so forth. It was magic, which explains everything, so you don't have to worry about fancy mechanics and bullcrap. Like, magic makes things work. And all it did is there were symbols above each door, and you needed to line them up to match them to unlock the center room. It worked out great. It seems like that sounds complicated, but honestly, the players figured it out in maybe about 15 minutes. On top of that, though, there was some combat that had happened and some other puzzles that happened within each one of those rooms. So each one of those rooms was its own dynamic piece inside of that puzzle. So it worked together in one thing. So what you want to do specifically with encounters is make sure there's not just one simple thing. And that's what we're going to talk about next when we move into combat encounters. So when you're doing your combat encounters, you really want to think about what's going to make this combat interesting. If it's not going to be interesting, don't include it. So what you really want to think about is not having your players come in and coming into a 10 by 10 square room where there's an orc standing there ready to fight them. That's not interesting. It's really boring, and it doesn't make sense. So what you want to think about when you're making your encounters, really more in your game prep, is what were these orcs doing before the players came upon them? So at this point, we're going to move our story a little bit further to where the players are moving along with the caravan and Gerald, and they're doing their mission. And they're moving through the forest. And what they're doing is they're not coming up to a troll that's just standing there in the woods waiting to fight them. They're coming up to a troll that's near a pond, and it's digging through the pond trying to find something. So that troll is doing something in the world. It's not waiting for them. There's no reason for it to be waiting for them. So there's several ways that you can set up an actual combat encounter in whatever game you're using. You can use just regular old pen and paper. A long time ago, we used to use graph paper and like pennies and pencils and stuff. One of the easiest ways that I've found over the years are these really simple tiles. They come in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them will come with outside, with some outside indoor. Some of them will be dungeons. Some of them have lava on them and water and all kinds of other really cool things. This is absolutely one of the simplest things that you can use, other outside of regular pen and paper. They're really simple to carry around. The only problem with them is that you're limited to the set that you have. Another great one is Paizo. They make these tiles here, and they are they're kind of flimsy.
It's like a cardstock.
Yeah, they're cardstock, just kind of one-sided print. Some of them are two-sided, but not most of them. And these are as cheap as about 10, 12 bucks. And they are usually some sort of thematic. So this one is a bunch of ships. It's actually called Armada. And it's really cool if you're wanting to do a sea adventure, but they have all kinds of these taverns, armadas, cities, and they are probably actually the cheapest option that you can do. Yeah, another good option is you can get poster board and kind of set up a scene that you're wanting to put together. And this is a very crude drawing, but honestly, this is pretty much all you need, right?
Plus, it's infinitely customizable. You can tailor this to exactly how you want it to be.
Yep. Another thing, and we don't have it here, we have actually for our games is a giant, I think it's 6 foot by 4 foot dry erase board, and it's already squared off in 1 inch squares, and we'll use that a lot, usually below some of this other stuff. So if I'm wanting to do something really quick, like a really quick encounter, I will just go ahead and draw on it, and we can go from there. Another option that you can use to set your scene is something really nice like these 3D dungeon tiles. They are really cool for setting the scene. They look fantastic. A lot of them will come painted. The only issue with these is that, one, they're extremely expensive. And by extremely expensive, I think that we've spent easily a couple thousand on Dwarven Forge at this point in time over the years. There are some cheaper options nowadays, now it's getting a little bit more popular. And actually, eventually, Kaufman is going to go and do a video about 3D printing your own, which I think a lot of you will really enjoy. Another really good one is the ChessX Battle Mats. I couldn't find mine today. I don't know where it is, but it is a giant rolled up piece of dry erase. And that usually one side is hexed and the other side is squared off. Those are fantastic as well. Those are really great if you were running convention games or if you were running store games, but those are really good as well. But what you really need, and all you really need at the very least, is theater of the mind, being able to set up that piece, that setup, that space. So in this case, yes, we've set up this, there's this troll and he's down here by the lake, and our adventurers are traveling down the road and they have come across this troll. Now this troll doesn't see them, and that's fine, but you don't need that. You don't need these miniatures. All you have to do is something like this. As you guys are traveling down the road, it's been a very fine day for the most part. The weather's been pretty pleasant, about 60 degrees or whatever. It's okay occasionally to break in with real world things to get the players to relate to what's going on. Yes, we know that in Dungeons & Dragons, they don't know what 60 degrees means. But to the player, it gives them a nice reference point to bring themselves to that space. They know that 60 degrees feels well. They know that 90 degrees is hot. They know that 20 degrees is cold. So being able to bring that in just a little bit, just a touch, is okay, as long as it brings the player into what you're talking about. So it's been a really beautiful day. It's about 60 degrees outside. The sun is just above the center. You'd probably say that it's late in the afternoon. It's a beautiful day at this point. You're getting ready and thinking about stopping for the evening, maybe even for camp. And as you're coming across, you see a bridge in the forefront, and you see this break in the woods. And as you're coming forward, you see this strange sight off to the side of this water. The water itself is very blue, and you can hear it running, but you hear this splash, splash, and this grunting sound coming from there. And you're not sure what it is, but as soon as you break the tree line, you see this giant creature. It's huge, almost like this green and brownish skin, and it has these long nails and this huge nose. And you're not exactly sure. Go ahead and roll me a nature check.
Nature is a horrible 7.
Okay. You're not exactly sure if this is some sort of mutated orc or what exactly you're looking at here. But it is huge, it's ugly, and it seems to be trying to find something there in the water.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to Gerald and I'm going to say, good Lord, that thing's ugly.
Oh my, it is! Shh.
We try to sneak around it.
So already what you're looking at here is your players are trying to decide what they want to do, how they want to handle this particular encounter. Could they run up to it and bash it over the head and start combat? Sure. Could they try to sneak around it? Could they run away? There's so many different ways. Just because you plan for them to fight the troll doesn't mean that the players are going to automatically jump to that. Now, murder hobos exists, and some players will be like, let's go kill it immediately and not think of anything else. So, but this particular instance, it appears the player is wanting to go for and maybe try to sneak around it. So yes, if you would like to try that, go ahead and roll a stealth check.
Stealth. I am not very stealthy because I'm a fighter in armor. So
that's disadvantage, I believe. So
is it
roll,
disadvantage?
Yep, you're gonna roll twice and tell me the lowest one. Both of those look pretty bad.
Roll 3. So my final roll after I apply my modifiers is 2 on both rolls.
Right. So as you are attempting to sneak past the bridge, you hear a clank, 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 and you realize that even though you're trying to be quiet, you're not necessarily that quiet. And you see this creature just kind of look up from what it's doing, and it has this giant fish in its hand, and it looks like half of it's got a huge chunk taken out of it, and you can see the blood dripping from this creature's mouth, and you see a fish head just kind of sticking out of it, and it's just chewing on it as it turns and looks at you.
So I look at Gerald and I say, that didn't work too well.
No, it did not. I think it's time that you earn your paycheck.
I think it is too. Can we discuss the pay right now? Because I'm thinking 8 gold.
No, 5 gold a day is what we agreed upon.
All right. I guess a deal's a deal.
Gerald gets into the caravan, and you see him like kind of close the curtains and just kind of peek out of it. And good luck!
I should have known he wasn't going to help.
Yeah,
should have known.
No, that's what he's paying you for.
Yep. Okay, I draw my sword.
Okay. So at this point, we're talking about a combat situation between he's a level 1 character and a troll. I don't have to necessarily tell you, even if you're not really familiar with the game, how imbalanced this is. Sometimes you're going to throw combat encounters against your players that are more for the story than they are for the gamey experience aspect of it. In this case, the troll has some deeper meaning and some more backstory to it that we're just not going to cover in this video. Let's just say that there's a reason to have it here, or there's a reason for a dragon to fly overhead and land. Sometimes it's okay to throw creatures at your party that are higher level than them. They don't match CR. Matter of fact, I will go ahead, I have Kobold Press put in here right now, and we will see, well, I don't have to. It's a deadly encounter. It's huge. But in any attempt, our brave adventurer here is going to attempt to fight the troll.
Okay, so I've got my sword pulled out, and I guess I'm just going to charge him.
Okay.
I mean, at this point, he's already seen me. I've seen him.
Sure.
This is an inevitable encounter.
So he's wanting to engage in combat. What you would typically do at this point in time is go ahead and roll initiative. Many games have some sort of initiative system. A lot of the games that I've played, they will go around the table and they'll ask what you plan to do before your actual action happens. In Dungeons & Dragons, on the other hand, what they do is they do a dice roll. And so they'll roll their d20, they'll add their initiative score, put them together, and then you order people in rank. What I like to do, and I don't have them with me today, is put up cards on top of my screen in the order of the different players, as well as my monsters that'll go as well. And that's probably one of the simplest ways that I've found over the years to keep track of initiative, and so that the players can see what's going on as well. So we rolled initiative.
I got nothing today, buddy.
That's all right.
4.
So the troll will go first. Excellent.
Of course.
All right. Again, we can talk about the theater of the mind, and we'll just pretend that these tiles necessarily aren't down here. You see the troll look up at you, and he takes the fish and he throws it down, and you can see that you look tastier than it does, than this fish. You see it stomp towards you, lumbering towards you, and it reaches out with its giant hand, and you can see its huge limbs and its claws as it reaches down and it bats at you. Now, down here behind my screen, there are some things that can happen. I'm going to roll a dice, and I'm going to roll it, and I got a 9, okay? The troll has a +8, okay, for 17, and in Dungeons & Dragons, it's a pretty good roll. It's probably going to hit the fighter. I can probably one-shot this fighter. Sometimes, the DM can cheat a little bit, and it's okay, all right? Let me show you how. So just as the troll reaches up and it brings down its huge claws upon you, you hear this huge boom and explosion behind you, and you turn and you look, and in the forest, this huge cloud of fire and smoke, and the troll stumbles back amazed, and then you see it turn and run off into the woods. This is an example of using a creature, a combat encounter, as a set piece, not necessarily combat. Combat doesn't always have to be, I hit you, you hit it. Sometimes it is, and that's fine. And we don't necessarily need to walk through that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. However, if we were going to run this through as a normal combat encounter, the troll would make an attack roll and add the number, and I would say, Jameson, does a 17 hit your AC?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does, your armor class. Okay. At this point in time, you would look at the stats of whatever game that you're playing, and it will say how much damage that particular creature does in that particular attack. In this case, it does, I don't know, because I actually don't have the monster manual in front of me. So we're just going to go ahead and do what we think a troll would do off the top of our head, which is 2d8 for 8 damage.
I am hurting bad, but I am still alive.
You were still alive.
Still alive.
Yes. So the troll swoops deftly down, it strikes you, making a huge claw mark across your chest, dealing 8 damage. And that is the simple back and forth of what combat is. I'll do damage to him, he'll do damage to me, until one of us falls. Now, character death is something that can and will happen in any game that you're running. It really depends on how you deal with it that really makes the game. So just because a character dies doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be out of the game forever. There's always the chance of resurrection. Maybe you just knocked them unconscious. Maybe it's just for story reasons. Maybe you want to bring them back in some weird way where like they've died, but then they wake up in the second layer of hell, and now they have to deal with this prince of darkness who's going to make a contract with them, a deal, and bring them back to the mortal realm to do something really interesting. Death doesn't always have to be the end of the journey, especially in games like Dungeons & Dragons or other role-playing games for that matter. Death can be just the beginning. Matter of fact, in 3rd edition, there was this awesome supplement called Ghost Walk, I think is what it was called. And the whole concept was, this book is for when your characters die, then they become ghosts. And so there was a melee ghost class and like a mage ghost class, and that's what they became until they basically became normal again, and then they went back to normal. But anyway, the point being is that death doesn't always have to be the end. Just because a character dies doesn't mean that they need to rip up their character sheet and walk away from the table. So knowing when to end your game session is just as important as knowing how to begin it. Sometimes you'll want to end your session on a cliffhanger. So in this particular example, there was just this huge explosion in the woods, the troll ran off. Now would actually be a pretty good time to go ahead and end your session. It gives your players something to look forward to in the next week, like, well, what happened? Just like if you're watching a television show like Game of Thrones or Timeless or whatever it is that you happen to watch, I like to end them on those cliffhangers. It gives those players something to talk about and something to think about until your next game. Other times, you want to look at natural ending points. Like say they've traveled, you've done your 4 or 5 hour session, whatever your allotted time is for your game, and you've come to a point where you've settled in a town, or you've just finished that dungeon. Whatever it may be, finding that natural setting point is a good spot. What you don't want to do is end it in the middle of something that's actually going on, so of an actual encounter. So you don't want to end in the middle of a puzzle. You don't want to end in the middle of a fight. Like if the troll and the party were fighting, you don't want to end in the middle of that, because then you're not going to remember what the health was of the individual creatures, the abilities that were used, etc. Same thing with a social encounter. You don't want to end in the middle of a social encounter where you're having a discussion back and forth with a non-player character, because you're not going to remember exactly what you were talking about. Get to that natural ending point or cliffhanger. A cliffhanger's fine, and go ahead and end your session. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a different format for us. We really wanted to sit down and get you behind the DM screen. If you guys like these kind of videos, or if you want to see more, if you have some questions for us, please go ahead and throw them down in the underbits. We'd love to take some of those questions so we can come back and revisit this DM screen and really focus on those. Again, there's those like and those share buttons. If you like this, go ahead and share us with some of your friends, hit the like buttons, and go ahead and subscribe so you can see us each and every week. Thank you very much. See you next week.